Today's video, we'll be looking at my 233 MHz Pentium-based DOS machine.
We review old technology from games to old PCs, and don't forget the doors. Don't get ancient electronics. We cover it all.
So this is my 233 MHz Intel Pentium-based DOS computer, fast DOS computer. I did actually cover this computer probably like 7 years ago. This is one of the first videos I did on my channel. I believe I labeled it something like Anatomy of a Pentium-based DOS computer or something. I probably had like 20 or 30 subscribers at the time. So I thought maybe it was time to give this machine another look. It has changed a moderate amount, and also, you know, I've got some more subscribers here. I think this machine deserves some more eyeballs on it, so I just wanted to do an update video on this machine. I'd also like to say this is like my desert island DOS retro computer. So, you know, if I was on a desert island and for some reason I had electricity and you know, a monitor and everything to make this thing work in games, this would be the computer I would take with me. And there's several reasons for that. I just think it's kind of a jack of all trades DOS machine, and it's just a really cool machine. It also has some sentimental value because when I was really like getting back into like actually building computers and really getting into retro computing again, this was like the early 2000s. This was actually the first machine I had put together and built. So prior to this machine, I basically had always, like throughout the 90s, it was, you know, it was whatever my parents would get me for Christmas. And even after that, when I started, I bought my first computer, it was all pre-built stuff. And it was modern too. Well, Windows 98 modern for the time. But as far as building like a retro computer, putting together any computer, this was one of the first that I actually put together myself, and I got lucky. This is the same case, original case that I found at like a swap meet flea market 20-some years ago. Yeah, I put this guy together, and this, you know, I beat like Eye the Beholder 1 and 2 on this guy. I've beaten a lot of like classics. I played a lot of classic games on this machine. Went back, played a lot of Doom and Duke and stuff, and this was the guy I decided, of all my machines, this was the guy I decided to play it on. Like I say, it's not as, you know, I don't know if the word glamorous, but, you know, it doesn't have the same allure as like 486 or something, but it's a very cool and versatile machine. So of all my machines, why would I choose this machine as my kind of desert island DOS machine? I think it's just the most versatile of all of my machines. I mean, it will play pretty much anything from those golden years of DOS, and it will play them really well. Now, it excels at later DOS stuff, so and more of the action-oriented stuff. So first-person shooters, this thing excels at. So we're talking Duke 3D, Doom 1 and 2, even Quake to an extent, although at the, you know, obviously at those crazy high resolutions, it's not going to be able to keep up and run it well. But like at your standard DOS resolutions for the time, it will run Quake quite well, especially with that Pentium, which Quake was optimized for. So this excels at those first-person shooter late-era DOS titles. But it will also play a very large bulk of those classic golden age of DOS games as well, and even like older EGA titles and back. Now, of course, with the speed of this thing, the further we go back, you know, into the 80s and maybe even early 90s, we're going to hit some compatibility issues just because of the speed of the CPU is too fast. You can use things like MoSlow, you know, various results with that. I just use another machine. But this still, I mean, despite that, this should play the bulk of DOS titles just fine, or with a little bit of fine-tuning and tinkering. So that's why, you know, this would be my pick for my desert island computer. So in this video, yeah, we're just going to take a look at this machine. We're going to open up, take a look inside at all the goodies, and of course we'll run some benchmarks, play some games on it. So let's just do a quick overview of the outside of this case. I do not know the maker model of the case. It's nothing super special. It has these like nice little flares here, the little vents. But other than that, it's a pretty standard beige box. I don't think I would want anything different for my mainstay like DOS retro build. Just the basic stuff in here. I got a CD-ROM drive, 5¼ inch, 1.2 megabyte floppy drive, 3.5 inch, 1.44 megabyte floppy drive, so all of our DOS basics here. And then just for a little bit extra versatility, I did throw in a zip drive, because I still actually use these zip drives a lot for transferring information to DOS machines. I find them to be very useful. I don't really do the whole vintage retro networking thing, so for me, zip drives are actually one of the most convenient methods. Power LED, hard drive activity LED. Two labels, got an ESS label on there. We'll take a look inside of this guy in a minute. And then we have our MMX Pentium Intel Inside sort of silver badge here. I don't have anything to put right here. This thing, I would have put that there, but it's like a slightly different size, so it doesn't really fit in there. It didn't look right. So I just put it above it. Maybe I'll find a nice badge to put right there. So, I mean, I guess that's it for just looking at the case. There's really nothing special on the sides or back or anything. So I'll open it up and let's take a look inside. Okay, so let's take a peek inside here. So the motherboard we're using, an FIC PA 2013. Now this is probably one of the better or best Super Socket 7 boards. So in a DOS build, yes, it's a bit of an overkill. This would probably be living more up to its potential in a Windows 98 build with a faster CPU, to be honest. But when I first got this machine at the swap meet, this same model board was in there, and it's just, this is the model board I've always used for this build. So I'm familiar with it. I really like it, so I am sticking with this board. So here is our CPU. It's a Intel Pentium 233 megahertz, so that is the highest speed of the original Pentium. Well, not the original Pentium line, but the Socket 7 Pentiums. This would be the fastest Intel CPU to put in here, and of course I could put faster CPUs in there, but it's kind of 233 megahertz. It's kind of at that point where anything faster would just be too much. Unless you're specifically building like a DOSzilla build where it's like really overpowered CPU, it still feels right. It's hard to explain. Of course, the CPU is too fast for a lot of like some earlier DOS titles, but it feels right for this build. It's not too fast, and it's still fast enough that on those later DOS games, it has enough horsepower to play them smoothly and play them with high detail. So like your Duke 3D, Quake, things like that. So that's, yeah, I do like this CPU. It's rock stable too, rock solid. Originally, I had a Pentium 200 in there for years. When I originally did the video on this machine, I believe I was rocking a Pentium 200. But I figured, yeah, what the heck? We're running a 200 megahertz Pentium. Let's do the extra 33 megahertz of horsepower. Let's just throw in a 233 and just say we've maxed it out as far as Intel Pentium go. Memory is also overkill here. I believe we're rocking 128 megabytes. I'm not even sure there's any DOS games that would even need that much. Maybe one of the late DOS titles. One of the Elder Scrolls. For some reason, the name's escaping me, but I think the last Elder Scrolls title that was DOS. It wasn't a traditional RPG. I don't think. Battlespire, maybe? Maybe it was Battlespire. I think I remember reading that one's very resource-intensive DOS title. It might, take advantage of all that RAM, but actually it's probably hurting compatibility, especially with older titles. I've had some games just flip out if there's more than 32 or 64 megabytes, but it should be fine for like later DOS titles. If you want to get kind of snazzy, I guess you could take half of it and set up like a ROM RAM drive or something like that. It hasn't really hurt me much. Again, the focus of this really is later DOS titles, so that's fine. AGP slot right here, this is not used, and then PCI, and then Essential 16-bit ISA for your sound cards, and I do use both of these, and we'll talk about that when I show you the different cards. Via chipset, although, you know, this is DOS, it's not super important. This is already overkill. What is built in? We got PS2 for mouse and keyboard, USB, not really applicable for DOS, 2 serial ports, which is nice, and a parallel port. Another thing I like about this motherboard is there's no built-in sound or video, which personally I like. Our hard drive here, I think it's a Max Tor, maybe 2 gigabytes, I think, and I just have it hooked up directly to the motherboard, and I believe it actually detects this whole hard drive. So, you know, 2 gigabytes ID I don't need to throw in I also used to have a SCSI controller card in this build, and I had a secondary hard drive with a SCSI, and it was too much. I went through this period of time where I was just putting SCSI drives in everything. It was just cluttering. It wasn't really adding much to the system except heat and noise, and this isn't even close to being filled yet, so it really wasn't benefiting me much. So I did remove that. So alright, so let us look at one more last thing on here. Again, super overkill, but we do have 1 megabyte of L2 cache on here. Actually, the original board in here was one of the rare ones that had 2 megabytes, but I actually removed it because I did feel that specific motherboard did deserve, you know, like trying out a faster CPU in it and all. And I had another one of these boards, one of the more standard ones with 1 megabyte, so I just swapped them. So I just got the 1 megabyte L2 cache version rocking here. Alright, so let's take a look at the cards. So first up here, let's take a look at the video card. And what we have here is just a Verge GX PCI. I didn't really feel a need to use an AGP card, although AGP would work in DOS. I don't believe any of the Verge cards came in AGP, except for the GX2, and I didn't want to go with that one. So I believe originally I had a Trio 64 in here, and then I eventually upgraded it to the Verge GX here. I think this is like the second fastest of the Verge. It's one of the faster ones, the GX. This one is from 1997. I believe this one is 2 megabytes, although it might be 4. I can't tell off the top of my head, but it doesn't really matter. Anyways, I did want to go with the Verge card just because it does use the same 2D core as the Trio cards, and the Trio cards are sort of very well known for their DOS compatibility. So this card will pretty much run anything. And these are known as being very slow 3D accelerator cards, but I'm probably never going to use this for 3D. Maybe. So this is really primarily a 2D card, and in DOS it absolutely excels. I believe DOSBox actually based like their default like settings on the Trio 64 2D core, which is in here. I guess it is a bonus that this will also do S3D, and I believe there are a couple DOS games that will do 3D acceleration in S3D with this card. So I guess that's kind of like a little bit bonus. But yeah, overall, just for compatibility, this isn't the fastest card out there, even for 2D, but it is certainly fast enough. And it's just the compatibility is just excellent. I've never had an issue with this card at all as far as DOS games and compatibility. So that is why I went with a Verge GX card for this build. And of course, no self-respecting, high-end, late-era DOS PC would be complete without a Voodoo 1 card. So now this card takes care of our 3D acceleration on the rare occasions that we do play a DOS title that is 3D accelerated. And there were indeed a small handful of games that are DOS titles that do take advantage of Glide and that do run in DOS with 3D acceleration. using a Voodoo card. Now you can certainly use a Voodoo 2 if you want. A lot of games also have patches where you'll actually get better resolution and you'll get better features with a Voodoo 2. There's also a small amount of games that will only work with a Voodoo 1. So I kind of wanted to go with the compatibility a little bit more. And you don't have to worry about like patches and stuff, because sometimes even if a game will work with the Voodoo 2, you'll have to like install a patch or something like that. This will just work with those early games that take advantage of Glide in DOS. So I think like Carmageddon is one off the top of my head I can think of. I am actually a little scared to test this one because our last machine I put together that had my Righteous Voodoo 1 card in it, I discovered that it was no longer working. It was giving me all kind of graphical issues, and I haven't fired this guy up for a while now. So, gee, I hope this card still works. We'll test it out. Anyways, this is a pass-through card, so you would connect your primary card to this one, and then you'd connect your monitor to it. It doesn't really, it's not a standalone card. You do need a 2D card like my Verge GX to run alongside this guy. And now we're going to get to another area that this machine excels at, and that is sound, especially for later era DOS titles. And sort of the centerpiece of the sound with this machine is this guy here. This is a ESS audio drive. This is an ES1868F. This is a very well thought of card. Very easy to run and install. You'll notice there's not a lot on here. There's a couple chips here and there, but it's mostly integrated into here. Originally I had an AW32 in this machine, but it suffered from the hanging MIDI bugs and things like that, and I just wanted to not deal with that anyway. It almost made some games unplayable, depending, so I wanted to go with this guy here. So right off the bat, the ESS audio drive here, it does not suffer from the hanging MIDI bug that the Sound Blaster suffers from. It's a cleaner sound in general, in my opinion. It emulates FM very well. That is a weakness of it. There is no genuine Yamaha OPL3 chip on here. It does emulate FM sound, but it does emulate it very well. It's very close. Not perfect, but close. Not an issue for me with this build since the focus is later era DOS stuff. So I probably won't be using FM too much on this machine. So that's not a huge deal for me. For me, because I am using a daughter board, it does have a wavetable header, and we'll show you that in a minute. It was very important to switch over to a card that just doesn't have hanging MIDI bugs, and this guy fit the bill. The one thing, it was actually a little bit hard finding the full height version of this card. These are pretty cheap, and there's a lot of them on eBay, but you'll find a lot of them are like half height cards, or the wavetable header will be in a very odd configuration. So if you have like a full wavetable card, it just will not fit right. So it was a bit of a challenge actually finding a full height ESS audio drive card. Now you may be wondering why I have all this electrical tape here, and that is just because there's jumpers, and this is an IDE header that I am not using, and my wavetable card sort of sits on them, and I just kind of felt weird about having the bare metal touching my wavetable card. So since I am not using the IDE connector here, I just put some electrical tape over it just to protect my wavetable card. And right here you can connect a CD-ROM drive to it. Pretty simple. We do have a joystick port. I believe this also acts as a hanging MIDI bug free MIDI port. Speaker connector, so line out, mic, and line in. So yeah, a lot of upsides to this. There's even a lot of later, well, maybe not a lot, but there are a number of late DOS era games that actually directly support the ESS audio drive. Downsides, again, it does not have an actual OPL3 FM chip, and it's also not 100% Sound Blaster compatible. So you may come across a game here and there that just will not work correctly or work at all with this card. But like I said, mostly focusing on late era DOS stuff, so that's not quite as much of a concern for me. But the bulk of games should still run perfectly fine and sound really good on this card. And this is another reason I'm not too concerned about the lack of a real OPL chip, because for music, when I can, I'm going to be using this guy here. And this is a daughter board. So this is the NEC XR385, and it's basically a perfect clone of the Yamaha DB60XG. So that's Yamaha's sort of, well, that was their wavetable card. That was kind of like their wavetable version of their MIDI box. And Yamaha kind of had their own version of Roland's sound canvas. I actually prefer the Yamaha version. I think it has a couple extra things, a couple little extra instruments and stuff, but I just like the sound of it a little bit better. The first time I heard Doom running with the Yamaha XG MIDI standard, I was just kind of, I don't know, I was just kind of blown away. It just feels like it has a little bit of an extra punch to it. So I just really like the sound of it. So you're not gonna believe me maybe, but when I picked this guy up, I think I paid $25 for it. This was quite some time ago, maybe 10 years, probably more than 10 years ago. Apparently there was a warehouse at some point in China with a lot of these just sitting in there, and the guy was selling them off at like 25, $30 a pop. Thankfully I grabbed one. I wish I would have grabbed 2 or 3 actually, because they're quite sought after and quite expensive these days. Although there are a lot of different options that have come out recently that people have been grabbing. But I still prefer, the vintage stuff, the authentic stuff. So I still would prefer to have this nice little daughter board here. But yeah, this is going to be doing the bulk of, music in this machine. Any game that supports general MIDI or the Yamaha XG standard, this guy will be taking care of music. And here we have the daughter board connected. And as you can see here, it hangs over a little bit, and it's resting on that ID connector. That's why I put the electric. When you would connect it, it would hang down below the connector here. So obviously it wouldn't fit in the machine. I'm glad I found one of these cards in the full height. They're out there. It just doesn't seem like they're as available as the half height cards. So yeah, this is the heart and soul of the sound for this machine, and this handles pretty much everything. We've got digital sound from the ESS, nice crisp, nice digital sound. And then if I ever have an occasion that I need to use FM, this should most of the time be able to handle that pretty well. But I have one other sound option I'm going to show you guys. And that is this guy here. So this is the Gravis Ace, the Gravis Ultrasound Ace. So this is basically a Gravis Ultrasound without all the extra fluff. So this card was specifically designed to install next to a Sound Blaster card. So you didn't have all those messy Sound Blaster emulation issues that you might have with a full-length, full Gravis Ultrasound. This guy was specifically designed to install next to your Sound Blaster. And, if you ever had the occasion to play some ultrasound games, this guy would take over, and you'd be good to go. Originally, I had this card in my 486, and there are some advantages of putting this in a slower machine. One is it will do some of the sound mixing, or all the sound mixing in hardware. So some titles, that might sound a little bit choppy when they're being processed through a Sound Blaster on a 486 will sound a lot better, and they'll, consistent on this Gravis. But I'm redoing my 486 like completely. And I found myself not ever really using it in that machine. So I decided to just put it in this machine. I think it will get more use in this machine than it would in my 486. Between this guy and my ESS and the MIDI wavetable card, I think I've got everything covered. All you have is a line in and a line out. So your sound card would funnel, anything it's doing through here and then out. And then, of course, if you were setting up a game to play Gravis Ultrasound, of course, it would also come out from this card. Right here, this is to set the address. The drivers are very simple to use with this guy. There is an issue. There is a jumper here for your ad-lib sound. It is disabled on this here. Usually I would say just disable it because it could conflict, I believe, with your main sound card. There's also an issue in the version 1.0 where there's no joystick connector here, but in the hardware it's still there, so it can cause issues and it can conflict with your main sound card that has a joystick port. So there is a patch available. If you're using version 1.0, be sure to install the patch that will disable the joystick port on this guy. Otherwise, there is a version, I think 1.1, where they fix that bug. Alright, so here we go. We've got everything installed. We've got our sound cards taking up the two 16-bit ISA slots, and we have two of our PCI slots taken up by the video cards. So, yeah, that SCSI card I used to have in here just made a little bit too busy. But other than that, it looks good. We also have a case fan here that's blowing down over these cards. I don't think any of them ever really get very hot, except maybe the Voodoo card, maybe. Although I don't think the Voodoo one is known for getting too warm. And just to get a better look at all this pass-through stuff, here's our main video card. This is the Verge GX, and then I've got a nice thick sturdy cable here. Goes into our Voodoo one, and then we connect our monitor here. Then for our sound card, I have another little cable here coming out of the speaker out and then going into the line in for the Gravis, and then you'd hook your speakers up here, and everything should be passed through. So okay, so I guess it is time to hook it up and let's do some benchmarks and play some games. So here is our machine posting. So as we get into these benchmarks and then the video gameplay, just keep in mind that whatever you're seeing here, the screen capture, the image actually looks a lot better on my CRT monitor. As I use this, I give this disclaimer a lot in my videos, but because of my capture process, sometimes the color's kind of washed out. It doesn't look that great. But let me tell you, it looks really good on my CRT monitor. Also, throughout this video, it looks okay now, but every once in a while, if the resolution changes or something like that, it might cut off a little bit of the left or right. I tried to keep on top of that, and there's a little like auto configure button I can hit that usually fixes the issue, but every now and then maybe I couldn't get to it. So if you see a little bit on the left or right cut off, it's because the capture device it just happened, and I just didn't catch it in time. So I think what I want to do first is let's just play a couple of games, just the intro to a few older games, and see how the ESS audio drive handles the sound in some of these slightly older games. And one of the really cool things with sound, I like the options this build gives me. You know, you can have your digital sound with the Gravis or the ESS, and then your MIDI through the Gravis, the ESS, or the Yamaha MIDI daughter board. So there's a lot of options you can mix and match. You can go with the more standard like ESS for digital sound and the MIDI daughter board for the music, or you can like kind of mix and match it up. So I like the options.
time to play with myself.
There he is, stop it! You there, stop the You're not on.
Okay, so that was a couple games there. We used a mix of different sound cards. But let's take a closer look at that Gravis Ultrasound Ace. It does have, when you install it, the install it package does come with a little like MIDI player here. So let's take a listen to it real quick, and then let's take a look at some games exclusively running with the Gravis for the music and digital sound effects.
Drivers ready! Engines ready! Go!
Now, even though compatibility was really good using the audio drive and the MIDI wavetable, Gravis Ultrasound compatibility was a little bit more hit and miss. For instance, Duke 3D, because of how the resources were allocated, it would not accept the Gravis Ultrasound because my IRQ was set to 11, but it wouldn't accept an IRQ that high. Now, of course, if you change around your resources on your build a little bit, you wouldn't have that issue specifically with this game, but how I had mine configured, I did run into that issue. I also had trouble in a couple other games, for instance Tomb Raider, where the audio drive sounded and worked fine. But when I tried to use the Gravis, Laura's voice sounded very gravelly and demon-like, and then the computer would promptly lock up.
Right, let's go adventuring. Right, let's go adventuring.
Right, let's go adventuring.
And just to help me remember, I have written down all the relevant information for the sound cards, and I just taped it to the side of the case on a little white piece of paper. Sometimes I just find that, like quick reference to be very helpful. Sometimes, when you're setting up a game and you're setting up the sound card, and maybe the auto configuration, it just doesn't have one, or it's kind of wonky. I think it's good to just have the information right there, easy access, where you can take a quick look and find out. Alright, so let's take a quick look at some of the DOS 3D capabilities of this machine. So we're going to look at a couple games running with Glide over the Voodoo 1 card. And we'll start off with Tomb Raider.
A powerful 21st century attack helicopter whose flight characteristics and weapon systems were science fiction just 2 years ago. You'll use this baby to observe military activity reported in this area, the cause of which is still unknown.
And here's Extreme Assault running in software mode, and it's kind of immediately apparent if you look at the terrain compared to 3DFX Glide mode. The terrain in software mode is much more blocky and pixelated, where with Glide mode it really kind of like blended in. I mean, it did kind of look like Vaseline was smeared on it. That's usually what they say about 3DFX Glide modes, but I think it really helped the terrain opposed to the software mode. It's also really evident, like if you look at the helicopter, like the little wings on it, there's just like the lights and stuff. Everything is very like edges and pixelated compared to the 3DFX Glide mode. I much prefer the 3DFX mode with a 3D acceleration. This game also lets you choose between running the MIDI and the CD audio for the music. And interesting, in the sound setup, of all the games I played, this is the only game that specifically lets you pick the Yamaha XG for MIDI as opposed to just sound canvassed or just kind of generic general MIDI. Sound setup in this game actually lets you specifically pick the Yamaha XG. Running games in 3DFX Glide mode, though, wasn't completely flawless. I did have a couple hiccups. For one, when I tried to play EF2000 version 2.0, I don't think it's running in glide mode. I don't really have any way to confirm or deny this. Now, the 2.0 version, the version I'm playing here, supposedly automatically installs and works with the Graphics Plus version, which is the version with the 3DFX patch, but it didn't seem like it was running in 3DFX mode, though. Usually you'll get like a 3DFX logo pop up before the game starts when it runs in that mode, and I didn't get anything like that, and just by looking at it, it didn't seem to be running in that mode. Everything I looked at, though, said it kind of should automatically. I didn't need to install patches or anything like that. I did read in the manual, it sort of seemed to suggest that it was very confusing. It said even though the 3DFX Glide mode is a DOS program, you are supposed to run it through like a Windows DOS prompt. So it's really like a Windows game that's supposed to run through the DOS prompt. I don't know. It was kind of weird. But the game ran fine. Very smooth, and it ran okay. But I just don't think I was able to get it running in 3DFX mode, especially if you look at the terrain and the ground. That looks like software mode. It looks like kind of pixelated terrain, kind of like we saw with the software mode with Extreme Assault. But the game did play. I just didn't have the time to figure out how to get the 3DFX mode working right.
2. Request permission to engage. 3. Request permission to engage. Incursion by hostiles at 359 degrees 51. Can you intercept? Incursion by hostiles at 359 degrees 49. Can you intercept? Update your target at 300 degrees 2 Angel 8. Update your target at 117 degrees 0 Angel.
Unfortunately, Carmageddon was another game I couldn't get running in 3DFX mode. I kept getting this fatal error, unable to load DLL. Which is kind of weird because I know for a fact I've gotten this game working on this hardware in 3DFX mode. If you watch my original video on this build from 8 years ago, I actually show this game working in 3DFX Glide mode. Same motherboard and everything like that, same graphics cards. So, I did a fresh install of the game, but I just kept hitting this issue where it was missing the DLL. I didn't have the time to figure it out. I know this game can work on this hardware in 3DFX mode. I just don't know why I couldn't get it working this time. I guess the DLL was missing, or it was looking in the wrong place. I don't know what the issue was. I could get the game working in software mode just fine, though. I obviously would have much rather getting it working in glide mode, but it did work fine in software mode. Now, if I had a little bit of difficulty getting some of the 3DFX Glide games working, I had a lot of difficulty getting any games working with the S3D, the Verge card, and the S3D special 3D API for that card. Now, I kind of expected that problem because all these games that use S3D API, they're really designed for the original Verge card. So the Verge DX, the Verge GX, and the Verge GX2 generally have difficulty running these games. And since I'm running a Verge GX, I expected to have difficulty playing these games that support the S3D API. Thankfully, there is a program called S3D Run, and you can usually supposedly use this program to get these games working with the later cards. And as far as I know, from what I've seen and heard and watched videos on the internet, all of the S3D games should work using this little program, even if you're using a later card. Unfortunately, it did not work out for me. I did try all the games, obviously. I just tried a small handful, and they just gave me problems. The terminal velocity, it would, as you see here, I would use the 3D run, or the S3D run, and it would just take me to the screen where it would say loading sound driver, and then it would say run setup. But I had previously did run setup like multiple times, kept giving me this issue over and over. Actua Soccer would start to load up, and you could get into it. When you try to start a game, it would just lock up. So the only game I was actually able to get running using the S3D run was Whiplash, the S3D version of Whiplash. And it's not a great version of the game. It arguably runs smoother, but it actually, in my opinion, it looks worse than the software mode. And I was really confused at first, and I checked the internet and I checked YouTube and to see other people's if they had the same issue with it. And yes, apparently it does look not great in this mode.
Roger that. I've got the line. I'm going for it. Okay, and taking him out.
Now, just to see if it would help anything, I did remove my Verge GX, and I did replace it with an extra original Verge I had sitting around. Unfortunately, it wasn't fully loaded with memory. It only had 2 megabytes of memory as opposed to the full 4 megabytes, which I think may have contributed to the issues, but it didn't really help. I didn't have to use S3D Run to get games working now, but the ones that didn't work before still didn't work. Actua Soccer still froze up when trying to load a game. Terminal velocity actually got into the game this time, though. It said, S3D detected. It got that logo, and it started loading the game up, and I could go in, but when I would select the mission and it would load up the actual game, it would lock up. I don't know what's going on there. That might have been an issue with not enough memory. But yeah, so not such great success running games on this machine in S3D mode. Alright, so we've looked at some benchmarks, we played some games on this guy. So am I happy with this machine? And, despite some of the hiccups, I'm going to say definitely yes. The thing is, it does its primary duty, what I primarily wanted it to do very well. And that's just play late-era MS-DOS titles in 2D. It does that almost flawlessly, and it plays a lot of the games I initially intended this machine to play very well, which is those late DOS-era first-person shooter games. So Duke 3D, Doom, Doom 2, those type of games. It seems to play just fine. Very little issues. As far as sound goes, that ESS card and the Yamaha clone MIDI card, pretty much rock solid. Pretty much, I know that ESS card is not 100% Sound Blaster compatible, but a lot of the games I played on here, no problem detecting it. I think that's mostly relegated to older games with newer, late 90s, mid-90s DOS titles. Everything's probably going to detect that card and run it just fine. It wasn't entirely as clean sounding as I had hoped or wanted. I still heard some like clicks and pops and things, but that might be just how I have things connected. So I actually run the audio out of a splitter when I'm doing the capture. So I don't know if that contributed to the little bit of noisiness, but I mean, I'm still very happy with it. The Gravis, it was a little hit or miss. Most of the time it did seem to be detected and worked fine. Couple games it didn't. Not really a problem. That's just kind of a bonus. Gives me a little different, more sound options for me. So that's just kind of a bonus. it still seemed to work most of the time. The area where we had the most hiccups was just, was like getting games, running with the Voodoo or running S3D with the Verge. That's not an issue with me. That is a secondary ability of this build. I'm probably going to be doing 3D accelerated DOS titles few and far between. I'm sure looking up some patches, messing with some things here and there, I might be able to get some of those titles to work, but not really a priority with this build. Again, 2D DOS titles was the priority for this build, and I think it does it great. So, I don't know, what do you guys think? Do you have any suggestions on, things I could do with this machine, or do you think it's pretty much where it needs to be? Personally, right now, I think this machine, for what I want it to do, is where I want it to be. But if you guys have any comments or suggestions or anything, please put them in the comments. What do you think of this build in general? Let me know. I love to read your comments, and I'll see you in the next video. Thank you for watching.